Welcome to Alaska Weather. This is Eric Holloway with the National Weather Service for February 20th, 2020. If you would like to research your weather a little bit farther after this broadcast, of course, we have a couple options for you, 1-800-472-0391, or we have the web link there that you can explore your weather options at weather.gov/Alaska, and if you replace Alaska with Fairbanks, Anchorage, or Juneau, you can further refine your search depending on your area of concern. Lastly, we also allow you to contact us by email. If you have any questions about the weather or what we're doing here, please don't hesitate to contact us. Taking a look at the hazards map, we do have blizzard warning out for portions of the eastern Norton Sound and Kuskokwim Delta and Nunavak Island until noon Friday. Otherwise, there's winter weather advisories out for the Seward Peninsula, Chukchi Sea Coast, St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait Coast until noon Friday as well. And then winter storm warnings, let me get out of the way here a little bit let's switch over here, for the Juneau and the Klondike Highway. We have the winter storm warning out for that area. And that's until 3 a.m. Friday with heavy snow forecast. Otherwise, the high wind warning for the Juneau area, including Gastineau Channel, until 6 p.m. this evening. We did get a report of 80 knot gusts there in Gastineau Channel, so that warning did verify. We also had reports of, out on the delta there, of the Kuskokwim Delta, we had reports of quarter-mile visibility and gusts of 35 knots there as well, so that verified. Looking pretty nasty out there right now. If we look at the satellite picture, we'll set this in motion here. You can see that that low centered here with a stationary front out of ahead of it, and then we also have an occluded front lining up along the Gulf region and a triple point approaching southeast Alaska. Snow showers and rain in portions of southeast Alaska. We also had some snow showers coming down on the western portions of the mainland. We also had some just scattered snow showers across the Alaska Peninsula, and you can see that cold cumulus out there flowing through Unalaska, Adak, through the Bering Sea there. And we'll set this in motion again. You can see that that low pressure is going to be following us through into the Susitna Valley, and then finally make its way into the northern Gulf here over the next 2 days. And so what does this look like at the surface map? You can see that there's that occluded front I was talking about lining up along the North Gulf with a 972 millibar low just near the end of Kenai Peninsula. Otherwise, snow shower through much of the western mainland, Seward Peninsula, and even up in there in the western Brooks Range. Otherwise, down through Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula. And stepping out here, you can see some rain showers, especially over the southern end of the Panhandle with that warm front approaching, but otherwise triple point analyzed there. Snow showers through Yukon and British Columbia, Yukon Territory and British Columbia, and in portions of the eastern interior. For tonight's weather, that low fills to a 979 millibar low. And you can see that low hangs with us in south central. Otherwise, a weak stationary front almost becoming washed out there. Otherwise, an occluded front moves further inland across the Panhandle. Otherwise, we're going to continue with rain showers in portions of the southeast, especially at the lower elevations there. As you move further inland, scattered snow showers across there. Otherwise, snow showers scattered across the Gulf. Otherwise, scattered snow showers continue through much of the southwest and Bristol Bay region. For Friday's weather, that low, again, stays with us, a 987 millibar low now. That occluded front now a trough. Stationary front continues with across the north there with scattered snow showers along that boundary. Otherwise, weak warm front through the Alaska Peninsula, and a trough out there in the Aleutians, spreading scattered snow showers. Otherwise, we're going to continue with mixed precipitation, even rain showers there in the southeast, at least for into Friday. Those rain and snow showers continue even Saturday, but should be scattered by then. Further inland, again, snow showers. That low finally moves further east to a 1,005 millibar low now in portions of Prince William Sound there in the North Gulf. Otherwise, cold front moving into the Gulf, and high pressure showing up there, and looks like some clearing weather there for the YK Delta. Otherwise, scattered snow showers through portions of the interior and along the Brooks Range. And there's our next low showing up as a 982 millibar low in the central Aleutians. For low temperatures, Friday morning, we're going to be looking at minus teens and minus 20 there, minus 16 at UAFTV. Otherwise, Point Hope is minus 13, Kotzebue minus 11. Looks like we're going to be, Fort Yukon's going to be 8, Eagle 15, otherwise 8 also in Fairbanks. Tanana looks like it's going to be 8, Galena minus 2, and then we'll see some single digits and below 0 readings there in the YK Delta, and Bethel minus 7. Otherwise 20s across south central, and teens in portions of the Alaska Peninsula, and 20s across Aleutians and rest of the Alaska Peninsula. But taking a look at the Panhandle, looking at 30s there, Haines, Skagway 36, and rest of Juneau 34, Ketchikan 36, otherwise Yakutat 35, Valdez 33, and Cordova 32. For Friday afternoon, looks like temperatures are going to be, again, minus teens, and across most of the north slope there. Point Hope's minus 10, Kotzebue minus 9, Nome minus 8, Savunga minus 7, and the Fort Yukon area minus 15, Eagle, 23, Northway 16, Fairbanks 18, and 30s across south central, Anchorage 30, Kenai 31, Homer 28, Kodiak 28 as well. And then look like we're going to be looking at teens through the Bristol Bay region, otherwise 20s through the rest of the Alaska Peninsula, and with 30s out the Aleutian chain. Switching over to the southeast Panhandle, looking at 30s across much of the area, 39 in Haines, 38 in Ketchikan, Sitka 38, and Yakutat 36, Valdez 36 as well, Cordova 38. And what are we looking at for Saturday morning? We're looking at minus teens again across the north slope, across that area. Arctic Village 1, Anaktuvuk Pass minus 1, Fort Yukon 3, but most of the colder temperatures are going to be showing up there in the YK Delta, minus 18, at Bethel and the lower YK Delta, minus 18, and looking at Unalaska at, minus 13 there at Nome, and 12 at Anchorage, 14 in Kenai, and 15 in Kodiak. Otherwise teens through the Alaska Peninsula, and 30s across the Aleutians. And looking at the Panhandle, we're looking at 20s across much of the northern part of the Panhandle, 30s across central and southern, with Juneau 30 and Sitka 30 as well, with Cordova 22. And lastly, for Saturday afternoon, we're going to be looking again minus teens across the north slope, Arctic Village 6, Anaktuvuk Pass 1. Looks like temperatures warm up across the YK Delta to the single digit, just below 0, and minus 5 at Bethel. Nome -5. In the south central area, look like teens and low 20s there, and single digits in the Bristol Bay region. Otherwise, the Alaska Peninsula looks like they're going to be in the teens and 20s and 30s out the chain. And St. Paul looks like it's going to be 32. And for Cordova 30, Valdez 29, Yakutat 33, Haines Skagway 35, Juneau 36, Sitka 37, Ketchikan 38. So to summarize, we're going to have some cooler temperatures move down the western side of the mainland, but otherwise generally warming conditions across much of the eastern mainland.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather for Friday morning. We're going to be tracking a low that pretty much hangs out here in Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound area. Frontal systems, occluded front, stationary front, otherwise cold front down here, stationary front across the North Gulf, causing IFR conditions along the Gulf through the Panhandle, marginal conditions throughout much of the region, even IFR conditions in portions of the Alaska Peninsula, and again through much of the eastern interior up through the Yukon, and just offshore on the Arctic coast there. Again, low pressure system remains pretty close to Prince William Sound. Frontal system dissipates, causing IFR marginal VFR conditions along much of the Panhandle into the North Gulf Coast and down through Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. Otherwise, IFR conditions through the eastern interior Yukon Basin. And again, one more day with IFR conditions through much of the eastern interior, marginal conditions, improving conditions through the Panhandle, improving conditions down along the peninsula, and you can see our next low pressure system showing up there in the eastern Aleutian or western Aleutians. And Saturday afternoon, looking at IFR conditions there on the North Slope Brooks Range, otherwise limited IFR conditions around South Central, generally marginal VFR conditions through the Panhandle, pretty good flying weather through much of the Southwest and the Alaska Peninsula, and again, there's our next system moving into the Aleutians for Saturday afternoon with IFR conditions. Past conditions for Friday, looking at marginal to IFR conditions later in the day for Anaktuvik. Again, marginal, then IFR. For the passes on the Alaska range, looking at Lake Clark and Merrill, both marginal to VFR conditions. Rainy, marginal early, and then IFR by late in the day. And Windy Pass, marginal conditions there. Isabel, marginal. Mentasta, VFR conditions there over on the eastern side of the Alaska range. And Snider, marginal. Portage, IFR with that low in the Prince William Sound area. And Chilkoot and White Pass, still IFR conditions down in the Panhandle. Freezing levels for Friday morning, just there edging near the southern end of the Panhandle, elevated freezing levels there to 2,000 feet. Otherwise, the surface freezing level crosses the Alaska, much of from the Panhandle up through the North Gulf, down through the Kenai Peninsula, and out through the Western Gulf and down through the Aleutians. Icing on Friday, looking at, with that big system and frontal system above 5,000 feet, we're going to be looking at isolated moderate to considerable moderate in some areas of the Panhandle and into the North Gulf. Otherwise, isolated moderate out in much of the southwest and down through the Alaska Peninsula between 3,000 and 8,000 feet there. For the jet stream on Friday, 150 knot wind coming into the Gulf, otherwise through the Panhandle, 90 knots there, otherwise pretty weak low pressure system over there in extreme eastern Russia. 25 knots there at the jet stream level at the northwest coast, otherwise pretty limited in light conditions at the jet stream level again, otherwise a low pressure system just off the California coast. And what does that look like at 9,000 feet? Again, that low extreme eastern Russia, translating down to 9,000 feet, pretty weak conditions through much of the mainland. through the Panhandle and North Gulf, 20 to 35 knots, even maybe a 40 knot there in the southern end of the Panhandle. Through the Gulf, 30 to 35 knots, even a 40 knot there. Otherwise, pretty weak out in the Aleutians. And for 3,000 foot on Friday, we're looking at, again, most of the flow is going to be over southeast or North Gulf with 15 to 25 knots. Around that low pressure system, pretty weak through much of the mainland with 5 knots and much of or even calm conditions there. Otherwise, across the North Slope there, 10 knots just touching the edge, and down through the Alaska Peninsula, 10 to 25 knots through much of the region. For turbulence, below 4,000 feet there with isolated to moderate conditions there, again with that frontal system. Otherwise, below 4,000 feet there in much of the Bristol Bay region, Kodiak Island. We'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Hey stargazers, 2020 is really fun for Mercury lovers. Our smallest planet will appear to chase Venus all year long, and this week you'll be able to see them line up right after sunset. It'll be hard to miss Venus shining brightly in the western sky, but if you look below our sulfuric neighbor planet and just above the horizon, you'll get a great view of tiny Mercury. If you're wondering, because of Mercury's position in the solar system, it's like a little puppy. It's always staying near the sun. But that means that Mercury has phases, just like the moon. Right now, it's waning, so Mercury will get a little dimmer each day, so make sure you spot it while you can. February is a great month to see Mercury's dance, but it will follow the sun below the horizon a little over an hour after sunset. So don't wait too long, get out there and keep looking up.
We're at Vandenberg Air Force Base. We're about 20 minutes before the launch of ICESat-2. You might see the white light off in the distance. That's the Delta II rocket.
It kind of feels like an idea that was always going to just stay an idea. But no, it's real. It's sitting on top of the rocket.
You know, and for me, it's kind of surreal. Like you say, it's been 10 years, and it's hard to believe. It's like, we're really here? This is really about to happen? It's totally cool.
This is Dr. Tom Newman. Over the years, his work has taken him to some pretty remote areas to study changes in the ice regions of our planet. And his research, among many others, has defined the goals of the new NASA satellite, the Ice, Cloud, and Land Elevation Satellite 2, or ICESat-2.
And we have ignition. And
the story of ICESat-2 really begins with ICESat-1. ICESat told us all kinds of cool things about the ice sheet and about sea ice that we didn't really know to ask. That data allowed us to measure elevation change of ice sheets in a way that we hadn't been able to before, and showed that all the action on the ice sheets, the places that were really changing quickly, were around the edges. So when we were thinking about what could we do better next time, we knew that was one key component.
In addition to the edges of the ice sheets, ICESat-2 needed to measure a dimension of sea ice that remained elusive: its thickness. To figure out how thick sea ice is, you can measure the height of ice sticking out of the ocean, or freeboard, and compare it to the height of water between the sea ice flows, called leads.
The problem is, sea ice is really dynamic, and those cracks open and close various places in the ice pack throughout the day, throughout the year, and what we need to do is have measurements of the ocean whenever it's available, wherever it occurs in the sea ice pack.
To solve that problem, ICESat-2 was designed with a fast pulsing laser instrument to take precise, near-continuous measurements across its 3 pairs of beams. For 10 years, everything about the mission was designed to measure rapid changes in the most rapidly changing part of the cryosphere. But it has to get into space first.
But it's a huge transition going from the ground to in space. We've spent better part of 10 years, thousands of people have been involved, and actually seeing the rocket there on the pad with all of that work kind of all put together in one place, it's pretty amazing. And then getting up in the middle of the night to go watch the actual launch, it's sort of surreal in a way, because you've put so much time into it for so long, and actually seeing it over there is like, whoa, you know, it's a big deal.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Lift off. With 1.
That was awesome. Totally cool. There it went. That was Atlas. The last Delta II heading on out. So Atlas has been turned on over the course of the first few weeks of the mission, really culminating for us with the laser. So this is our first look at sea ice data from ICESat-2, and it looks fantastic. The signal levels look great. We've got plenty of photons there. We're capturing ridges. We can clearly see the ocean. All sorts of cool stuff in there, and this is just our first data. It's only going to get better from here on out.
The data from ICESat-2 is well on its way into digging deeper into the unknown dimensions of sea ice sheets, and glaciers. It will shed light on changes in sea level and global weather patterns, and once again find new things about ice we didn't know to ask.
So my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
Slight chance the flight may see ICESat-2 in their center windscreen. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6,
That's gonna
5,
happen.
4, 3, 2.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine forecast. Let's take a look at the sea ice analysis today. Over the last several days, we've had a good portion of the pack ice moving southward past Matthew Island. But over the next 5 days with our forecast, we expect a little bit further northern shift of the pack ice again over 5 days. We also had some openings in the Cook Inlet that has now closed in after those winds died down that came through Turnagain Arm on Monday, Tuesday. Marine forecast for southeast on Friday, looking at winds generally from the south across the inside waters, 25 to 30, across much of that region. Otherwise, the outside waters, again, from the southwest at 25 knots, seas as high as 20 feet. Winds from the southwest there in North Gulf up to 19 feet in that region. For Saturday's southeast forecast, inside waters generally from the southeast or east, 10 to 15 knots across the region. Outside waters generally from the south, 20 to 25 knots, seas as high as 14 feet. Otherwise, from the east there in the northern Gulf, seas as high as 13 feet. For south central, looking at winds generally from the southerly direction, winds as high as 30 knots there, seas as high as 19 feet. Prince William Sound, winds generally from the south at 20. Otherwise, you get into Cook Inlet, we're going to be looking at winds generally from the southwest at 15 to 25. Near Kamishak Bay, winds generally from the west at generally from the west at 30 knots, seas as high as 11 feet. For Saturday's south central forecast, looking at winds generally from the west across the Gulf, 15 to 35 knots. Prince William Sound from the south at 10 knots. Otherwise, Cook Inlet, northern and central is going to be looking at winds generally from the northwest, 10 to 20 knots along the pack ice in there. Otherwise, winds at Kamishak Bay region from the west at 40 knots, seas as high as 16 feet. For Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, around Kodiak Island, we're going to be looking at winds generally from the west at 30 knots, seas as high as 18 feet, just offshore the Kodiak Island there. South side of the peninsula, looking at winds generally from the west at 30 knots, seas as high as 14 feet. Winds again from the west across the northern portion, northern side of the Alaska Peninsula. Winds from the west at 30 knots there, seas as high as 10 feet, just on the north side. And for Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island on Saturday. Around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the west at 25 to 30 knots, seas as high as 13 feet. South side of the peninsula, winds from the west at 25 knots, seas as high as 9 feet. And across the north side of the peninsula in Bristol Bay, we're looking at winds generally from the northwest at 25 knots, and down just north of Cold Bay, looking at winds from the southwest at 20 knots. For the Aleutian chain, looking at winds generally from the northeast at 20 to 25 knots across the eastern Aleutians, otherwise more easterly is central, and southerly 20 knots over the western side of the Aleutians. And for Saturday's forecast for the region, winds generally from the south across the central and eastern Aleutians, 20 to 35 knots, seas as high as 13 feet just south of Adak. But otherwise, on the western side, winds generally from the north near Shemya, 35 knots, seas as high as 11 feet. Between Adak and Kiska, winds from the east at 35 knots, seas as high as 14 feet. For the west coast, winds generally from the northeast at 20 to 30 knots there, just on the edge of the pack ice near the Pribilofs. Looking at winds from the northeast at 20, seas as high as 7 feet. And for Saturday, looking at winds generally from the east at 10 to 15 knots, Norton Sound southwest at 10, otherwise southwest of the Pribs 15. For the Arctic coast, just offshore there, winds generally from the east at 10 to 15 knots, down the northwest coast and down through the Bering Strait, winds generally from the northeast at 10 to 25 knots on the pack ice there. And for Saturday's forecast, winds generally from the west at 10 knots along the Arctic coast there, just offshore, and through the northwest coast and Bering Strait, winds generally from the south at 15 knots. For tonight's weather, we're going to be looking at that low moving through south central with a 979 millibar. Mixed precipitation moved out across much of the panhandle and scattered snow showers through the southwest. See you right here again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.